Hello, my name is Craig Thompson, and welcome to Behind the Story. And this doccast, which we're calling Return Journey, the way forward for travel and tourism. I want to start off with some facts and figures. In 2019 alone, travel and tourism contributed a record $8.8 trillion and 319 million jobs, and was responsible for more than 10% of all global economic activity. The COVID-19 pandemic has erased those numbers in an instant. Where do we go from here? To answer that question, we've assembled a panel of some of the leading thinkers in the tourism and travel sector. Greg Klassen is a founding partner of 2031 Consulting, a firm that designs and develops strategy for tourism leaders around the world. Greg is also the former president and CEO, as well as the former senior vice president of marketing for the Canadian Tourism Commission, now Destination Canada. Cedar Swan is CEO of Adventure Canada, a soft adventure operator that specializes in experiential expeditions in Canada's Arctic and East Coast, destinations that include Nunavut, Greenland, Newfoundland, and Labrador. Joining us from Watamu in Kenya is Damien Cook, founder and CEO of eTourism Frontiers, a company that specializes in developing online tourism across Africa and other emerging markets around the world. Deirdre Campbell is managing director for BD Tartan Integrated Marketing, which has built its practice on the travel and tourism trade with clients that include airlines, hotels, attractions, and tourist boards. And Muna Haddad. Muna is the founder and managing director of Baraka, specializing in sustainable and community-based tourism with the mission of minimizing the negative impacts of tourism on the environment and society. Her clients include the World Bank, USAID, and the EU. She joins us from Jordan. Greg, why don't we start with you? You have a pretty top-level view of the Canadian and the global tourism market, given your experience. Give us a snapshot of where we are right now.
Yeah, we're in a really challenging situation in tourism. It's not just a Canadian challenge, it's a challenge that is impacting all of our panelists globally around the world. We work with destinations that include South Africa, we work with Jordan, we work with destinations here across Canada, and each one of those destinations has virtually seen a complete cessation of tourism. No tourism, no transportation, nothing is really moving, and that's having just an absolute profound impact right now on the business of tourism. In 2019, as you mentioned, tourism saw its best year ever. It was on track to doubling tourism from 1 billion to 2 billion international travelers by the year 2031. That has virtually stopped right now, and that trajectory is no longer going in that direction. Now, probably we'll talk about this in a bit, but there's some good news there. But of course, there's a whole lot of bad news right now as mostly small and medium-sized businesses and communities are being profoundly impacted.
Cedar, tell us about your business and how the cruise industry in particular has been affected by this and your company's place in that market.
Absolutely. Adventure Canada is a company that specializes in small expedition cruising. And so what that means is small group tours of 200 guests or less that travel at any given time. The cruise industry, of course, has taken a massive hit in terms of terrible PR, as well as just some real serious concerns, health concerns for clients that are traveling on board ships around the world. And it's definitely been a challenge for us. Our entire season, we're a seasonal business, so we operate from June till October, primarily in the Canadian Arctic and Greenland and Atlantic Canada, as you've suggested. So for us, our entire season is completely closed. So even in the coming weeks or months, if there is a gradual opening and lifting of the restrictions, for us, there's no real opportunity for new revenue streams until next June when we start again. So the cruise industry is under fire. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And I think rightfully people from all across the world are looking at ways, modes of travel that they feel comfortable with. And one thing that I do think is interesting is that the cruise industry itself is mandated to report on the health and safety of each individual on board any given ship on a daily basis. And we're the only segment of the tourism industry that is mandated to do that. So while we're seeing figures that are alarming when you look at cruise in general, we're also not being measured in the same way as many other transportation and tourism sectors are. So that's one point that I think is a little bit interesting to consider as we're sort of weighing the different modes of travel. Now, expedition cruising itself is quite a bit different than sort of your larger standard cruise. Many people are lifelong cruisers, but the larger cruise experiences tend to attract first-time cruisers or people that are just sort of emerging into the marine tourism market, as we call it. People that tend to take our expedition cruises are very sophisticated travelers, have been traveling extensively throughout their lives. And I think what we're seeing anyways are a little bit more comfortable moving forward with plans for the future, which is very encouraging for us. When we had to cancel our season in mid-March, we gave our guests the opportunity to receive a full refund or transfer to next year and beyond. And over 41% of our clients have done that, which is really positive, positive for us. And our guests are expressing their desire to continue to travel. I mean, there are natural apprehensions, and we're working with them daily on that. And also, I mean, ourselves, we're still working in a larger unknown world. Right now the Canadian Arctic is completely closed to marine tourism through December 31st, and the organizations that have mandated that, they're not even looking at 2021 yet. So there is a little bit of an unknown.
Damien, that adventure theme crosses over to you, I imagine, in Kenya. Tell me generally what the impact is in your view of the current situation from your perspective.
I mean, it's been, of course, and I think if there's one word that's exhausted itself, it's unprecedented. There's been an unprecedented use of the word unprecedented, I think, in the last couple of months. None of us in the industry have seen anything like this before. And that goes with all the destinations. Like Greg, I work with multiple destinations at a strategic level, not just in Africa, but around the world. And we literally saw something move so swiftly from, I think we may have a problem with the outbound Chinese market, to the cessation of all travel. So the impact of that, of course, cuts across everything. But I think when we do talk about the adventure travel sector, and when we do talk about scale of operators, that's two really important things to consider when we look at what recovery may look like. Greg talked about 2019 being this incredibly successful year for tourism, but we did see some trends during that year. That was the year that Thomas Cook went bankrupt. We were starting to see a fundamental shift happen in travel that was driven, I believe, by millennial travelers and connected travelers towards experiences over products, and people that no longer consider themselves tourists but travelers. That rising belief that millennials were driving upwards was changing the industry. If you look at the success of Airbnb in shifting away from the traditional hotel model, there were already some changes that were there in tourism that I believe this pandemic will accelerate. Many people are talking about the business evolution process this pandemic is going to drive. I heard someone discussing today how cinemas may not come back. We knew they were already under threat from the rise of Netflix and streaming content, and maybe this is just going to speed up that evolutionary process. And the same thing I think will happen with tourism. The tourism that comes back will be very different. And the bigger the operator, the bigger the cruise ship, the bigger the tour operator, the bigger the channel, the more harder they're impacted and are less likely to recover because they depended on volumes of travelers to succeed. In a way, this creates an advantage for those smaller operators, those people that are geared to dealing with lower numbers, because we're going to see lower numbers coming back. we're not going to see mass tourism return, if at all, in the way that it was in 2019 until 2023, and possibly not at all, because it's doubtful those businesses that relied on that volume travel can survive that long out of business. So I think we're going to see a complete reinvention of travel, and I think adventure, experience, culture, and space, the ability for more space, is what's going to define travel. We're going to see a shift in the aviation industry around physical space on planes. That's going to increase the cost of flights, and therefore shift us towards a higher yield travel model that's going to be about less people spending more, which we all know is a better form of tourism for destinations, for the communities it supports, for the environments that it supports. So even though this is an incredibly tough time, I do see it as a period of opportunity as well. Of course, we're going to see some elements of the industry disappear, but that may have just been an evolutionary process that we've seen accelerated by this pandemic. And I honestly believe that what we will see emerge is going to be a better form of tourism if we encourage it in that direction.
Una, like a lot of people, you're focused on sustainability as well as the impact of tourism on local economic development. Tell me what the reaction has been from your region.
So Jordan acted very quickly on the crisis. So immediately we shut down all airports and all access to the country. We've had very limited cases, no more than 400 cases. So and we're just today starting to open up the country a little bit. So in terms of the response, it came very quickly, but so did the shock. The shutdown of airports during high season was really alarming to everybody. We saw a waterfall, like everybody else. We saw really a waterfall of cancellations. I think the impact on our business, we run community-based tourism models in rural areas in Jordan, and the impact was very strong because of the localized supply chain as well. So we go into partnerships with local community members, we create experiences and services for the sector, and we also localize the supply chain. And when we're very proud of the numbers. We're always bragging about 73% of the income of tourism staying in these villages. What we also saw was that the impact was very heavily felt on all fronts. So I think the response had to be, governments are responding to large businesses and not necessarily taking into account the supply chain, where we felt we had to get involved in that. I think Damien touched on this, but also looking at our response, we wanted to make it a point to give full refunds to everybody, which was a really strong PR move. It went viral, but at the same time, it was a painful thing to do. And that didn't really, it didn't help in allowing us or putting us in a position to support our community. And as we came out of the shock, we realized that that's the priority, is to work with the people that have trusted us for years and been providing incredible experiences. And we reached out to our network, we reached out to our community, and we're able to provide relief packages for them to keep them afloat, and are looking at expanding. I think we're very primed for the future of travel. I think all of us as people have now been locked into our homes. We've been baking bread and posting it on social media. We're very focused on supply chain. We're all of a sudden very conscious of where our food is coming from, where our experiences are coming from. So I think the supply chain in general has never had such a big platform as it does today. And as we trickle back into destinations and as we go back into traveling, these are the kinds of experiences we're going to want. We're going to want to be in smaller places, in rural places, having genuine human connections. I think all of us really miss hugging each other and being around each other, sharing real humanity. These beautiful moments that the travel experience provides us, where we connect as people. And I don't think we will lose that. And I think now more than ever, we appreciate it and will be seeking it out in the future. These meaningful experiences are very much the essence in sustainable travel. And knowing where our money is going, asking where our money is going, making sure that we're benefiting the locals, we're respecting their culture, we're listening, we're being present. And I'm sure all of us have also seen the news coming out on the very positive impacts on the environment. I think it shocked us all to see how quickly nature can revive itself if we're just conscious of it. And we embed that. It's a reset button that allows us to embed that into our operation moving forward.
Deirdre, you have a lot of experience with crisis communication. Most crises, when you're in the media relations business, are very specific, but this is quite broad. I'm wondering how you balance the needs of your clients with the communication strategy that the public has to see. What have you been dealing with from your client base?
Thank you for that great question, Craig. Absolutely, I think in this time of crisis, the thing that I'm finding with our clients is there is a tendency to pull back and wait and see, so that they can answer in a way that that they have better information, and that's not happening because nobody knows. As Damien said, it's unprecedented. So communicating a lot, connecting with your clients, letting them know that you're thinking of them and you're waiting to see what the information is, has been critical for them to keep those relationships going. I think for me, as someone who's been working in tourism, as we all have for many, many years, our frustration in the past has been that no one took tourism seriously, particularly in North America. They took it for granted. It just happened. And we all used to advocate for the fact that we needed more attention given to tourism, because the numbers that you mentioned, the number of people employed, the number of how it impacted the GDP, was so high but no one ever gave us the respect that we needed in order to ensure that tourism was sustainable, both financially as well as environmentally and socially, until now. And its education has been key. So for our clients, our expedition cruise clients, our small wilderness resorts, they're doing so much education to their guests, so they understand why it's so important to not cancel or ask for refunds, but perhaps keep investing in them for the future, and create that better understanding of how these small independent operators need to fund themselves and what their business model is. From a government perspective, we've been really advocating, and they're listening to understand that tourism, if it's not managed well, has such a high negative impact that we really need to pay attention to what's happening. Greg would probably relate. For years, we've tried to convince the restaurants and the bars that they are also in tourism, that they need to be part of the tourism industry. And they haven't necessarily seen that, but now of course they do. They understand that while the locals can support them somewhat, they do need that tourist or that visitor to come to also impact their bottom line. So echoing what everyone's saying, this is a chance for advocacy. This is a chance for us to keep tourism at the front lines, to educate what positive tourism can do. It's also a time for responsible travelers to understand that going into communities is a privilege, not a right. So we also work with Indigenous tourism, and there's a lot of Indigenous tourism communities across Canada that are closing their own borders. They're actually saying we're not allowing tourism into our communities, even though our experiences are highly sought after. 1 in 3 international visitor wants an Indigenous tourism experience when they come to Canada. We're going to let you know when we're ready. And that's putting the power of tourism back into the communities, which I echo what Damien was saying, and Muna. That's not a bad thing. It's actually a powerful thing, because in order for it to grow and to be authentic, we need to allow communities to have a bigger voice. So we are in a crisis, but I do think, as everyone's heard, within every crisis there's opportunity, and I think it is an opportunity for a better tourism moving forward.
Greg, that ties into something you've said quite frequently over the last few weeks. You've been quite vocal in your public comments about not focusing on the large tourism companies like airlines and the large cruise companies, instead focusing on the mom and pop, the bread and butter people who rely on tourism in a much greater way. Can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, first, I want to try some of Muna's bread. Because she made me hungry there, and it's really, I just love this idea of community. When you have this, everybody around the world is baking bread and posting it on social media, and now I'm thinking of the bread that Muna makes in Jordan. Sorry, that's a diversion, but it gets back to community, because this world really is one big, huge village, and community is incredibly important. And the community of our small and medium-sized businesses that make up our tourism industry. And I'm talking about those kayak operators. I'm talking about those, even the bakeries and the boutique hotels and the lodges. These are built on the blood, sweat, and tears of many families, many family businesses, many investors who've decided to take a risk with some of their investment dollars, and they've created those out of the community. They've worked with their indigenous populations to help support it. They've worked with their local community leaders to do that, and these are the ones that are most at risk. I know the big cruise companies with, I'm hoping they saved their billions of dollars to help them recovery. I know that the airlines, again, are going to be seeking major protection from some of their local governments. Some may go down, some may not. But it's the small and medium-sized businesses right now that I worry about the most.
Because we work in very remote areas and we're right there on the front line, I feel like it's been a privilege and a great opportunity to see firsthand how tourism can change people's lives. And we've seen that day in and day out. It's not just economic, and it's these mom and pop shops. It's the small community-owned business of a local woman who becomes a leader in her village, who becomes an idol for other girls who then want to join the workforce as well and start off their own businesses. It's such a wide impact that goes way beyond economics. It's not just making money, it's really changing an entire society. And we get to see this every single day, how tourism changes people's lives. I very much hope we'll continue to see that and see more of it. So I do want to echo what Greg is saying. Saving these small businesses will have a much wider ripple effect as well in these areas that very much need it.
There was a conference, I believe it was earlier this year in Vancouver, Victoria, about sustainable tourism, which has been referred to in this discussion. We were seeing a trend towards that. And I'm wondering, in spite of the bad news, perhaps this is an opportunity to hit the reset button and focus more closely, as some people have said here, on sustainability and making sure that the environment is respected and communities are respected in any redevelopment of tourism product going forward.
Yeah, I can certainly speak to that. That was a conference that we co-founded called Impact. And when we co-founded it in 2018, it was the first one. And we had actually quite a lot of pushback from the industry because they felt that sustainability, they didn't understand what it was. And particularly the bigger operators, they weren't convinced that it was a discussion we needed to have, or that it was a discussion that was worthy of just a panel discussion at bigger conferences. However, when we got everyone in the room that was really dedicated to looking at the tourism model, and again, sustainability across all lines, and what Moon is mentioning too is culturally as well, as we become more global, there's a danger of losing some of our cultures, some of our languages, and in this case, when people realize how many of the visitors and travelers that Damien pointed out want to actually experience the authentic culture, there's a pride in keeping it alive and talking the languages. So we saw that once people understood that the definition of sustainable tourism crossed so many different areas, that this was actually something that we should be paying more attention to. And we went from having 100 people the first year to breaking our record, our ceiling of close to 300 to 400 people in last year over 3 years. So I think it is a discussion that will continue. And I think this has forced us to look at it in a whole different lens, as far as it has to happen faster than we probably predicted. I know for you, Cedar, opening up the Arctic, and that's such an amazing, I'd love to hear some feedback from you on what it's been like working with some of those indigenous communities, because it's been pretty powerful for you to be able to bring people that have never imagined that there was such a vibrant culture in Northern Canada and experience it, or Atlantic Canada, and experience it firsthand.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, working, just to take a step back and touch on sustainability for a minute, over the past number of years, we've really been working very hard at this, and our clients have very much been responding. To provide a little context, we're not a large company. We have between 12 and 1,500 guests travel with us annually. And it's a very personal business. We are that family business, maybe not as small as some, but you know, we've been around for over 30 years, and we have very personal relationships with our clients, and we've really found that the way that we present and speak and action our sustainability plan really hits home and continues to be a driving factor for our clients to continue to engage with us. And whether they're booking directly with us, traveling with us again, or they're engaging with our larger network of not-for-profit and community-led organizations that really wouldn't necessarily have access to the scope of people that then come across their path. And in fact, we'd actually been moving from beyond what we had been calling a sustainable tourism plan to a regenerative tourism plan. So not only are we looking to sustain the ecological world around us or the communities that we visit, but we're looking for ways to reinvest, to actually restore you know, different ecosystems, and support the integrity and the direction that local communities would like to see their own cultural heritage be celebrated and enjoyed, and what elements to share or not to share, etc. And that's been, we had really only sort of launched that discussion with our guests throughout 2019, and it was met with just, a lot of people hadn't even heard about it, but were really, really open to that concept. So that was really encouraging for us. And in particular, as you mentioned, we do a lot of our business, about 60% up in the north, and in particular, Canada's Inuit regions. And it really has been a very incredible privilege to be able to provide a platform for exchange. And, you know, we are the tour operator, we're bringing guests up north, but really what we are trying to do is provide a space for real exchange. I mean, we travel with experts from, you know, at the regional level, national level, international level, experts in their scientific fields and the social sciences, but we also really ensure that we also have a large and representative local contingent that comes on board to share their own personal experiences. We don't have a mandate. We don't say, please come on and talk about this. It's a platform for organic conversation. And clearly the people that respond and want to hold those positions are people that are very proud of their culture and would like to engage with people. So yeah, it's been, for us, a really positive experience for both our guests and our host communities. And, you know, of course, it's wonderful to be able to facilitate all of that. And I think I mean, the traveling public are really looking forward to that. When we started off, we were, you know, maybe 70 guests a year. And our growth has been slow, but we wanted it that way. But the market is there for people that are looking for a different kind of travel.
And if I could jump in too, I think that it's really important, all of those community elements, but we also need to think about the natural environment as well, something that's very important here in Africa. And we have seen over the years that tourism has come to play a fundamental role in the protection of wildlife, the establishment of national parks, the maintenance of national parks, but also with the rise of over-tourism, we've seen negative impacts of that as well. Here we have large predators who change their hunting habits because of the volume of tourism vehicles in their habitat, things like that. But now we see the flip side of that. What happens when there are no tourists? Yes, we've seen examples around the world of nature replenishing itself, but unfortunately, particularly in developing world economies, as we have here in Africa, what we've seen is an increase in poaching. no tourists, no infrastructure, and we have actually seen poaching happen in Botswana just a couple of days ago and a few other areas. And there's a clear balance that needs to be found as we bring tourism back to ensure that protection is preserved, but also it's in the most sustainable way possible. And that presents real challenges. In Central Africa, we have one of the highest value tourism experiences in the world, which is mountain gorilla tracking. One of the highest national park fees on the planet for that experience. But the reality is that's had to be closed down because mountain gorillas are susceptible to the COVID virus. We can't allow any human contact with them until this is completely eliminated. So that very well-funded national park infrastructure there needs to be rethought. How do we protect these species when tourism is impossible? So I think we'll also see coming out of this a rebalancing and a recalibration. Yes, reduction in tourism numbers is good, but what do we need to realistically sustain protection of cultural and environmental resources as well?
Another way to look at that, the same protection of the natural environment that Damien was just speaking of is, in particular, in a lot of the communities that that we engage with and work alongside with, the alternate to tourism, which in the Canadian Arctic is not a year-round industry. It is not providing year-round jobs for all individuals there. But one of the prime alternatives is resource extraction. And with the potential, if tourism was to be eliminated from those areas, there would be a continual mounting pressure to support that natural resource extraction in perhaps increased ways because of limited other options. And I think, again, it just really helps provide some balance and some diversification.
Yeah, that's always a challenge of megafauna, as we have here with large elephant herds and predators, is just they need to pay their own way because of land use, and you have the same issue with bears and any megafauna produces that challenge, and it is about that balance.
Exactly.
You know, if I could add, one of the most heartbreaking stories that I've heard was we worked with a client many years ago in a place called Iguazu Falls in Brazil. And this client is actually a paid attraction for over 1 million visitors a year that would come to their bird sanctuary. And what they did was focus on indigenous and local species with the Atlantic rainforest, which that region is in, and helped rejuvenate some of the birds at risk. There are at least 10 birds within that sanctuary itself that are down to one final pair of birds or one single version of that species. And they paid for all of that through gate attendance at their attraction. Well, they've almost virtually gone bankrupt. They've had no visitation in the last 2 months. They've virtually been almost completely wiped out, and they still have to feed those birds. And they still have to manage their programs, and they've got bare bones and just a bare amount of money right now in order to keep a couple of their sciences labs working and some of the feed going for those birds. So the significant downside, again, to tourism is that some of these species at risk, some of this management through tourism to support not just communities, but some sustainable bird species and animal species. And I'm sure the same thing's happening throughout other parts of Africa and South America. But it's heartbreaking to see that without any tourism revenue, these operations are ceasing to continue.
If I'm a small tourism operator watching this right now, I'm asking myself, as we wait for the industry to reset, what can I be doing to, one, develop new product, and number two, engage with my customers to keep that relationship going, even though we can't welcome them face to face?
Yeah, that's a big part of what we've been counseling our clients to do. And I think, you know, definitely this is a chance to continue to communicate and speak to them and create those personal relationships that are so powerful that Cedar mentioned, you know, that people feel that they're part of your recovery, you know, that they're helping you and they want to know, I think, sincerely, these strong relationships, but also people that are understanding this impact. And when they hear about the fact that it's just not about a business going under because they don't have a guest, it is about these natural environments and the conservation efforts that often are funded by these small businesses or like the Adventure Travel Trade is a client of ours association, and a lot of their members, they help fund the conservation of these wild places, because that's what drives their business, is the opportunity to see these places with a small footprint. It's how can we continue to do that and support these conservation efforts without necessarily having to go to see them. So it is innovating a way of fundraising and support. I think that's something that as a small business, continue to educate why these special places that you take your guests to need to be protected, and that why they're so special, because once we can bring people back, that's just going to increase their appetite to do it, but do it the right way. So that advocacy and education is something that you could be doing right now. And also local advocacy is critical. So getting in front of the media, don't be afraid to tell your story. We're seeing a lot of the media are asking for these stories. It's not a weakness to talk about struggling now and nowadays. It's a global struggle. So by putting it out there and creating these partnerships, we're seeing a lot of great collaborations where people are saying, well, wait a minute, you need X, I've got Y. Maybe we could work together and create something new or support each other. And I think that collaboration is important and critical and could be quite powerful as an outcome.
If I may add to that as well, I think one of the most critical things as any small business owner or a business owner that's suffering through this is self-empathy. We need to be good to ourselves right now. We need to think of ourselves, take care of ourselves, and grieve. I mean, we're grieving an industry that we loved and will not look the same. We're grieving a reality and a norm that will not be the same. We're grieving loved ones that are going through a difficult time. The entire world is grieving. So really to allow ourselves the space and time to have some self-compassion and feel everything that we need to feel and share that vulnerably, be vulnerable in front of each other and with each other. I genuinely believe that we cannot separate the individual from the business anymore. We are our businesses. We are very much one and we are very much aligned. And to go back and use this time to reflect a little bit on why we do what we do. What are our core values? What drove us to get here in the first place? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? And to really shed ourselves from the day-to-day, because that's really what we've been forced to do. We've been in a rat race and we're doing things because we've been doing them, but to use this opportunity to just let go of them and revise why it is that we do what we do and rethink it. Is there a better way to go about it? Are we doing the right thing? Can we adapt? Can we change? Is this what we want to be doing for the rest of our lives as well? And to be self-reflective. We are our businesses, and our strength in driving our business forward is very much our strength in self-knowledge and self-empathy.
I think many people have been paralyzed with the fear of not really knowing what to do, and that's great, really great advice for the people that are feeling that, because I concur, like you couldn't have a better time, I mean, albeit a forced time, to really reflect on what you stand for. And in particular in smaller businesses, it's easier perhaps to do that. And to just think of yourselves as a brand, and you are your brand, but your brand doesn't have to be tied to what you've always done. This is a chance to reinvent and keep the elements of your business that you love and look for those areas that can be different, because with every crisis there is opportunity. And I do think that not enough people acknowledge the stress that they're under.
Yeah, it's been very interesting for us too when we talk about that education component and never assuming that people understand how our business works. And I think there was a lot of assumptions that especially government and the people that were trying to help us, they understood that that this is what we needed. And if our voices were not heard, it wasn't changing. And an example was with Indigenous tourism in Canada, the CEO, Keith Henry, was adamant that the financial supports that were being given to most small businesses didn't apply to Indigenous businesses, because they don't own land, they don't work with the big banks, they don't, there was just, there had to be an Indigenous-led solution that was supporting the growth of that business, which was, at least 2,000 experiences strong across Canada, if not more. So you could see the constant, aha moments within some of the people that you would assume understood the business and realize actually they don't. And it's not their fault. It's just maybe it's our fault as an industry for not continually educating and taking those opportunities before this happened to ensure that we had a stronger system in place to support businesses. I don't know, Greg, if you have a thought on that too, since that was probably one of your biggest roles in your career, is doing that advocacy and education.
Yeah, I really think that if government didn't listen to tourism, just looking at the unemployment rate that we're seeing today, looking at the number of programs that they're scrambling to support and provide, is really mostly aligned with the tourism industry, which has arguably been the hardest hit and the most impacted in across Canada and probably around the world at the same time. So I'm hoping that we do translate this moment of significant challenge for our industry into some strong advocacy and support, because it's being felt. The impacts are being felt, and when this summer begins, and people are not able to travel to their destinations, they're going to start to feel that their normal right of travel may be somewhat restricted this summer. I'm hoping not. But that will start to be felt. We'll start to have a better understanding of the value and the importance and the impact that tourism has on us as our own well-beings, but also our own economies. And I think that's going to be really important.
And Damien, from your perspective, I'd be interested to hear what you think, because we always look to you for your marketing expertise and understanding. And I'm hearing that some of these destinations are actually trying to buy the business, and they're Greg and I talked about, like, a year ago, would you ever thought that Italy was deemed an unsafe place to go? And I think you and I had that discussion too. And then Africa's because of its impact, COVID-19's impact. But now we're hearing that, people are starting to come out with huge financial incentives. But is that going to work? Like, are people going to put financial above health? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a concern. And I think even destinations we've seen who have done a stellar job in managing the spread of the disease, like Jordan, who are with us today, one of the world leaders along with Australia and New Zealand and Taiwan, find themselves in a position of, we've eradicated the disease, now what? How do we open up? We're just going to bring a second wave. What's it going to look like when we actually open our borders? Here in Africa, we've been relatively little affected by this. Certainly in Kenya, where I'm based, we're in a similar position to Jordan, a couple of hundred cases and only 14 fatalities. We've introduced lockdown measures, but we're thinking now about how we re-engage with the traveling public. And it is this balance between economics and science. All the economic stimulus in the world, all of the marketing push in the world won't work until we get a clearer picture of how people are going to travel. There's a certain decision that's out of our hands, because it will become a government issue that's driven by science and health recommendations. And the aviation industry will obviously be a huge decider in that. I've done multiple of these webinars this week trying to establish what the new normal will look like. And I think what we're going to see emerging, and we've already seen some of the talk of this, is bilateral travel agreements where countries agree to take each other's tourists. Once a country meets a certain standard of aviation, airport management and tourism management, testing on arrival, and everything that comes with that, you'll see countries actually agree to take each other's tourists. I know there's talk of Australia and New Zealand doing this because they're both in a position of having virtually eradicated the virus, but not wanting it back. So I think that's something we may see spread into the European Union. And that's why domestic tourism is going to be the first wave of this. All research is showing us this, that people, the first thing they want to do is travel, but mostly within their own countries. Particularly in the US, that's come very strong, that people want to do road trips, they want to go to the beach. And they can do that within their own country. There's a real fear of being quarantined in another country if there is a second wave as well. It's almost inevitable we're going to see increased costs of travel as well. If you look at what they're suggesting in the aviation industry, the testing at airports, sterilization of baggage, people having to buy an empty seat next to them as part of the new fare structure. So until all of these things become clearer, until we see what that new normal looks like and how much it costs, marketing's not going to work. I think keeping people engaged and aware of what is there as a potential for them when they do travel is critical, but we need to go through a fairly difficult and interesting phase of seeing how all of this plays out in terms of how travel is enabled before we rush towards funding marketing.
So there will be pent-up demand. It's a matter of how that demand will be fulfilled.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's going to be fundamental changes that people may not be prepared for in the way that people travel. There's been a lot of discussion of what the new airport's going to look like and the new airport procedures will look like. And when people talk about being sterilized in a vapor tunnel entering the airport, having to produce health certification to even be able to check in, getting tested at the airport, having your baggage sterilized when you check it in, having your hand luggage checked. Some people have said, well, this sounds ridiculous, but they forget that before 9/11, we could virtually walk onto a plane from a car park. If the cockpit door was open, we could wander in there into the cockpit. These things will change, and they're not necessarily going to change back. The whole way that we travel will change, and I think it's going to become much more expensive too. And I think price is going to play a role in defining the new tourism as well. It is inevitable that airlines will carry less passengers. They're not going to be able to turn a plane around in 30 minutes anymore because they have to deep cleanse it. That will reduce frequency, that pushes up fares. Hotels are going to have to do so much more to cleanse their premises. So we're going to see a natural tendency towards low volume, high yields that's created through health and economics. So yeah, we're going to see a very different type of travel and a very different type of traveler.
There's a very big responsibility for us as tourism businesses that operate in remote areas towards the communities we work with. So when do we allow tourists to come in because they could be carrying the disease with them, the virus with them? When do we allow them in? I think there was one case of an influencer that chose to stay in Socotra in Yemen during the virus, which is insane. We have a responsibility as travelers, we have a responsibility as a travel sector towards the places we visit, and to keep that in mind when we make responsible choices of when we actually go back.
Absolutely, and I think that working with our governments and our destinations to communicate what the new travel looks like is important. But there's part of me that is also thankful that domestic tourism is going to be the way in, because I feel like we take for granted our local destinations, and maybe from the conservation efforts as well as like, why should we be celebrating and protecting our own, our own beautiful destinations within our countries? And Greg, you years ago, I think after SARS, you started that movement of really celebrating local experiences for residents or for Canadians. And I think you saw a difference, right, in attitude towards not only, where we live, but also that pride of where we live, but also that the understanding of tourism from a domestic perspective.
Yeah, we did. I mean, Deirdre's going back a couple of crises ago, to 2008, when we created a program. In Canada, we had done lots of surveys, and Canadians are amazing travelers. We love traveling. We love traveling the world. Where for a small country that we are, we're the 7th largest outbound travel country in the world. We were having a challenge getting Canadians to stay and travel within their own country, because they perceive the rest of the world to be more interesting and exotic than our own home. So we created a program when I was at Destination Canada called Locals Know, and that program took images and photos and B-roll of different places in Canada and asked people to guess where they were. And of course, they looked like the Sistine Chapel in Rome, or they looked like a place in the Caribbean. But in fact, these were Canadian places and destinations a little bit off the beaten track, not your very common places to go and visit. And we did create and we did translate that campaign into, I think, about a million visitors actually stayed within Canada and chose not to travel outbound. And those kinds of local campaigns, I think, are important for not just Canada going forward, but in other countries around the world, as we need to encourage our tourism industry to kickstart it again. And that kickstarting will start with local and domestic travelers at the same time. If I could just add one point that is just another major worry for me in terms of what the future of tourism looks like, is this idea that tourism is the carrier of disease. It has been cited as that people on planes and people on cruise ships were those that brought the disease from one country to another country. The facts speak for themselves. The most visited countries in the world, the Spain, the Italy, France, the United States are also the countries that have been impacted the most through this virus and challenge. We work with destinations in Canada right now whose local communities are saying, please do not bring back tourism. We are not ready for tourism. We don't want tourism. We feel as though if you bring an outsider into our communities, we see this in Vancouver Island. We've seen this in Muskoka. We've seen this in other parts of in fact, the north as well. Cedar, I'm sure you've seen a little bit of this in the north that said, we just simply do not want tourism because we know that tourism brings disease into our communities. So tourism is already facing such a tough rap with the challenges of over-tourism and carbon emissions and all those problems we wish we had that were so 2019 are going to be problems again, and we need to communicate effectively that tourism is still such a powerful force for our communities, for our locals, for our economies, for our cultures, and for our environment. And the role that they can play is so critically important that maybe the first campaigns aren't to get people to travel, but for us to welcome back travelers into our communities.
Yeah, and on top of that, I would add, I mean, Greg's talking about that sentiment in a country as developed as Canada. You can imagine here in Africa the concerns that people have, where we've been incredibly fortunate not to have had a major outbreak or spread of this virus with health systems that could not have coped with it. And the obvious concern that people have that if when flights are re-enabled and tourists come back, that the real risk of it actually bringing that upon us. And again, people that aren't invested in tourism, people that don't see benefits of tourism will be the loudest voices in that sentiment as well. So that's really important. It's yet another justification for why tourism has to do a lot more economic good and spread its dollars a lot further into communities if people are to value it enough to see it as a viable risk now to their health.
How much is the broader tourism sector dependent on whatever recovery there is in business travel? There's been a lot of discussion about the future of business travel. I'd like to hear about your concerns about that and what the influence of that might be.
Yeah, we've worked a lot. I mean, Destination Canada has a significant investment in business events, and I'm a believer in it in that sense of a lot of first-time people come to a destination for the first time for a conference or an event, and then they come back with their family. So it's a nice entry level into knowing a destination, also into an investment in a destination. So economic development, when you decide you might just bring your business and start a business there. We've seen a lot of that in BC. So I think business events are key. However, it's a good question, and I'd love to hear what the rest of the team thinks about it that works in this area, because we're all, even though we're getting zoomed out, we're understanding that we can have very fulsome and engaging conversations virtually. Is it the same as being able to see someone in person? Absolutely not. But I think the 1,000-person TED huge conferences, I think those are the way of the dodo. And I think we're going to start to see a different way of meeting and events. And I'm just not sure what that model is yet, but it is going to be critical for especially Canada, because so many of our destinations aren't seen as leisure destinations, but they are seen as business travel destinations. So what do you think, Greg and Damien?
I'm just so concerned. I mean, as a person who has been lucky enough to actually attend a TED conference, I just see the idea exchange and the energy that happens when you're face to face, human to human interaction in these random corners. And those are the same at conferences, and those are the same at business meetings. And Deirdre knows this because she runs a number of conferences, but it's almost impossible to get people back into the auditorium because so many people are so enjoying and interacting and doing business and having meaningful conversations. And I just don't know how we can replicate that online and through Zoom and through these technologies. But guess what? We're kind of doing it right now. And it's kind of working. And so, will we just adapt as we have been adapting going forward in our tourism life? Will that adapt to our business life? And will this be part of that normal? And our kids will think it was funny that we once met in person. I don't know. but I do worry about the future of business and large conferences, and perhaps it's just setting up not fixed seating so that there are distance between each other, so that there's opportunities to meet people through plexiglass. I don't know. We're going to, maybe I'd rather have a Zoom call than talking to somebody through a plexiglass. But it does worry me very much about the opportunity for business to be done in person, and I think that's so critically important.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to what I originally said about this pandemic speeding up evolution, and there were things that were under threat anyway. I think the MICE industry is going to be facing a lot of challenges that were maybe there before about the experiences they offer people. I think the conference industry had become very well heeled through selling a pretty same old product over and over again. Greg talked about the interaction in the corners, and generally that's what people found value in conferences, as opposed to the death by PowerPoint on stage of someone else trying to pitch you another product. I think models of things like trade shows, for example, were already on their way out. We saw a decline in those big tourism trade shows. I'm not a fan. Many people know of, you know, those models, the WTM, or the waste of time and money, as I call it, model of believing the only way that you can network and do business is to go and fly to another country for one day a year and sit at a card table handing out brochures. I mean, technology was always a viable alternative to that sort of model, and now we're all sitting on Zoom seeing this happen in real time. I think conferences need to make themselves, remake themselves into something else. I agree that technology doesn't replace face-to-face interaction, but maybe it's more about sales calls, road trips in market, different ways of meeting with people, having people come to your destination, buyers come as travelers and have those experiences and do business in your product is probably much more fruitful than some soulless conference center somewhere. So again, I think it's the pandemic speeding up some evolution in this space. Apologies to WTM if you're listening. I didn't mean to call you that. Actually, no.
Damien, to build on that question, we're seeing a rise of live experiences. Airbnb launched their live experiences, and many others are following suit. What are your thoughts about that?
Like live as in virtual experiences?
It's a live experience. So you're on Zoom with 10 other people taking a cocktail making class with somebody in Mexico.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting idea, and I've heard that some variants on that from. I've seen food companies now that will send you out a selection of cheeses, and you get online with your friends and have a little wine and cheese party and try the wine pairing and discuss it with your friends. It's an interesting idea. I know someone in the safari business here that wants to sell live stream safaris, that you book a game drive for a dinner party and you all sit there and the guide will talk directly to you around your table as he takes you on a game drive, and they want to monetize that. It's an interesting idea. I really wonder though if the virtual will ever replace the actual. I don't think so. I'm not a big believer in virtual reality as an alternative to tourism. I think it's a way of enticing us into an experience. I think it's an interesting way of giving someone a feel for the product, but in terms of replacing it, I still have my doubts. As someone that works in technology, I should probably say, great, yeah, let's do that. But I would be interested to see those models actually work and monetize. It seems to me like something that might be a gimmick that people might invest in initially, but it's still not going to replace the real thing.
Speaking of virtual, I want to go around the table one last time, and I want to end this off on a little bit of a hopeful tone. So if you have a last word that you want to share with the viewers, I'd be happy to hear that.
I would like to encourage folks to realize that this is a very real situation that we're all in together, and that we're navigating so many unknowns together. But ultimately, I really, truly do believe that there will be an opportunity to come back together and share experiences. Just as I was listening to that last conversation unfold, I just know for me personally, I don't have a desire to live in a virtual world. I want to see people, I want to feel the wind, I want to touch the waves, and I don't want to do that irresponsibly. But I really feel that it is the most valuable experience I have in my life, is the opportunity to engage with different people in different places. And that's what builds compassion and builds empathy and keeps us united as people. And I think ultimately it may take some time. We don't know how that will roll out, but that we are going to come back together. And I just encourage people to maintain hope.
Good thought. Muna, over to you.
Well, we're very lucky. We work in an incredible industry, and that's not going to change. People have always been curious, and they will continue to be curious. We are, as a human species, we're wanderlust. We want to know more, and we crave human connection. So travel is not going anywhere. We will continue to travel, but may we travel slower, may we travel deeper, and may we travel better.
Deirdre.
As we talked about virtual live experiences, part of me thought maybe this does make tourism and travel a bit more accessible to those that can't afford to do some of the experiences we're lucky to have. Maybe it is a way for us to open up the world and then bring it to people that may not be in a position that we're lucky enough to be in, which is a positive thing, which leads me to say that for those of us that were working in sustainable tourism and we were seeing this train heading towards us of over tourism and negative impacts and, residents not wanting tourism anymore because they just did not agree that it was a positive thing. That train stopped in its tracks. And now's the time that we can actually, I have hope that we can influence those powers that be, that tourism, if it's done well, can really be a positive thing for everyone. It's going to take time and hard work, and there will be collateral damage, absolutely, and that breaks my heart. But I think it's we are in this together, and we need to work together in collaboration versus this competitively, because now's not a time to be siloed. Now's the time to be to work together as a group for tourism, global tourism.
Damien?
Yeah, I mean, echoing all of that, I think we have to remember that people have traveled for centuries, but tourism as we know it and the tourism industry as such was a product of the post-war baby boom, when our 2 weeks leave a year was commoditized. And that's a word that both Greg and I use a lot, because experience turned into a commodity, travel turned into a commodity, and capitalism turned it into a mass market product. It did what capitalism does best. It sold at the highest volumes and the most money. And people felt like they were a commodity in a factory process. And as I keep saying, coming back to, there were problems that were here before this virus. The fact that the majority of millennials now becoming the predominant market we have, the worst thing you can call them is a tourist. They in no way identify themselves as tourists, and they're not interested in visiting tourist attractions or products, tells us that we're in an industry that by its very own definition had a major issue. We were calling ourselves the tourist industry and our ministries of tourism dealing with travelers that wanted experiences. And something's come along to speed up that process. And I think that what I hope to see come back are travelers having experiences as opposed to tourists visiting products and attractions within an overly commoditized system. It's got to change, and we need to make sure that it changes for the better, and it becomes everything that Cedar talked about she wants from a travel experience, that people get a chance to discover that.
Greg Klassen, you were instrumental in putting this great panel together. I want to thank you for that. So you get the last word.
Yay, last word. Well, I just find it interesting. I'm going to go back to baking bread. We're all baking bread. Our stores are running out of yeast. I keep checking back every second day. There's still no yeast on the shelves. We're planting victory gardens and we're cutting our own hair. We're hunkering down with our families. We're watching Netflix series and we're hanging out together a little bit. And I can't help but wonder if we start to apply some of the principles and the things that we've been forced to do and rediscover, it kind of feels like it's 1955 all over again. And I can't help but wonder if that's going to translate into a slower kind of tourism. Damien and I talk a little bit about fast tourism, like fast food. It's instant gratification tourism. And maybe we'll slow down a little bit. Maybe we will take time to breathe and experience the communities and the cultures and the places that we visit. maybe it will cost us a little bit more money and take us a little longer to get there. And maybe we'll stay a little bit longer and learn something along that way. So my hope for tourism is that we will, get into a slower version of tourism, stop with this fast tourism kind of idea, and regroup as families and friends, to do something that we've been deprived of for a couple of these months, that we know we really want to get back and do.
Well, if there's one thing that's come out of this, speaking of the virtual experience, it's making us communicate perhaps more than we've had time for in the past. So I want to thank everyone for taking the time out of their schedules to be a part of this, and hope everybody who is watching has gained some benefit and some positive feelings out of what lies ahead for the travel and tourism industry. So thanks everybody for taking part, and best of luck with everything you're working on.
Thanks, Craig.
Thank you.
Thank you.